World War II remains one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. There are hundreds upon thousands of stories of heroic, selfless actions, along with stories about the evil forces that were being fought against. Some stories have sadly flown under the radar. Number 5. Founded on December 6, 1917, the 7th Infantry Division of the United States Army has largely been forgotten and left out of history books. The 7th Infantry Division is the only active-duty, multi-component division headquarters in the U.S. Army, and is still active to this day. While the division was first created during World War I, it wouldn't be until World War II that they would play their part in the war effort and become the center of a scary World War II story. In 1943, after much preparation and training, the 7th Infantry Division were ready for combat, and in their first mission, they were sent to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. While the division saw combat here, it wouldn't be until they were sent to Okinawa, Japan, that the real fighting would begin. After landing in Okinawa on April 1, 1945, the division embarked on a 51-day battle. When the men first landed, they had no idea that 51 days later, they would still be fighting to capture Okinawa. For 51 long days, the division battled not only with the enemy, but with the elements. Alongside the unconventional techniques used by the Japanese army, they had to battle with extreme weather conditions and treacherous terrain, making the battle all the more difficult. The division was constantly under the threat of ambush, as Japanese snipers would hide in caves, waiting for the perfect time to strike. The division fought tirelessly to take key positions, only to be pushed back by the opposing forces or the unbearable weather conditions. Many soldiers who were there that day described it as fighting a battle over a freezing tundra, and that it would be so cold that even the Arctic explorers would shudder. Some days, the temperatures would reach a bitter -30 degrees Celsius, and the soldiers of the Infantry Division were not well equipped for the tundra, and were forced to brave it out, staying warm however they could. After 51 days of fighting, the Japanese troops who were stationed in Okinawa surrendered and the US forces took control. While the mission was successful, the 7th Infantry Division had paid a high price. In total, 2,340 soldiers were killed in action, along with 6,872 men who were wounded. For their bravery, 17 of the division soldiers were given medals of honor. Next time you're researching World War II, remember to take a look at the 7th Infantry Division. Number 4. During World War II, espionage and unique forms of communications were at an all-time high. Armies around the world were desperately trying to discover new ways of sending coded messages without the risk of having them deciphered by the enemy. The US was no stranger to this idea, and during World War II, they called upon the indigenous population to help them. Sadly, lots of native and indigenous languages have already become extinct, with hundreds of others also at risk. There are small pockets of society that still speak these languages. However, it's becoming harder and harder for indigenous languages to stay alive. During World War II, the US Army realized that only a small number of people spoke indigenous languages, such as Navajo, and they wanted to use this to their advantage. It's estimated that between 400 and 500 Native Americans joined the armed forces and took up the position of code talker. Their job was to utilize both English and their indigenous language to send messages between bases, offices, and other officials on the front line. The Axis forces had people who spoke English French, Japanese, and other languages, but what they failed to prepare for were indigenous languages. In order to communicate secretly, the code talkers would use words from their language to correspond with the letter of the English language. For example, the letter A was represented by the words Walachi Bela Sana Se Nil. As the war progressed, the indigenous people quickly learned that their language did not have words for many things used in warfare. The code talkers who spoke Navajo developed 411 new code words that did not originally appear in the Navajo language. For example, there was no word for submarine, so in the Navajo language, it became known as Beshlo, which literally translates to iron fish. In another instance, the word for cemetery became known as Jisha, which translates to among devils. While most code talkers spoke Navajo, other languages were utilized as well. The work of the code talkers is rarely talked about, yet remains one of the craziest World War II stories out there. And their hard work and dedication isn't something that should be forgotten about. Both during and after the war, the code talkers were forced to keep their work a secret. And it wasn't until the 1970s that the US Army officially recognized their war efforts. While the US Army may have downplayed their involvement massively, 5th Marine Division Signal Officer Major Howald Connor said, quote, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would have never taken Iwo Jima." Number 3. The final attacks on Japan in World War II need no introduction, and those events will forever go down in history as some of the creepiest World War II events. The lives of millions of people were changed in an instant, and the after effects can still be felt to this day. The final days in Japan are well documented. However, there is another side of Japanese World War II history that is hidden from view. This is the story of the Japanese holdouts. According to different sources, the Japanese holdouts held out for 2 different reasons. The first reason is that following the news of the surrender in August of 1945, the Japanese soldiers stationed in Southeast Asian and Pacific islands didn't believe that it was true. They saw their country as tenacious and strong, and never thought that they would be the ones to surrender. For some holdouts, it's theorized that news simply never reached them, as towards the end of World War II, lines of communication had been cut off. In 1974, Hiro Onoda stunned the world when he came out of hiding in the Philippine jungle almost 30 years after World War II had ended. Upon hearing the news that his country had surrendered, Onoda went into a state of denial and went deeper into the jungle, fearing that the announcement had been a ruse to draw out Japanese soldiers stationed around the world. For 29 years, Onoda survived in the dense Philippine jungle, using all of the knowledge he had obtained during his time as a soldier. News slowly trickled into Japan that Onoda was alive and well. Efforts were made to assure him that the war had ended and that he was relieved of his duties, but he remained unconvinced. That was until his former commanding officer visited him and, thankfully, managed to convince him to return home. The exact number of Japanese holdouts is unknown, and it's possible that many of them passed away while still in hiding. Number 2. You'd be forgiven for thinking that only German citizens and soldiers were involved in the Nazis during World War II. But thanks to historical records, we know that simply isn't true. Between 1944 and 1945, the British Free Corps was created as the Nazis attempted to spread their wings and push their influence throughout Europe. These men were recruited while in German POW camps, as the Nazis realized that they needed to spread their ideology into Britain if they had any hopes of surviving the war. As a result, leaflets were handed out to the British POWs that described the Free Corps as, quote, a thoroughly volunteer unit conceived and created by British subjects from all parts of the empire, who have taken up arms and pledged their lives in the common European struggle against Soviet Russia. Many of the men half-heartedly agreed to join the cause, and it's speculated that they did so while under duress because they had been brainwashed by months of propaganda. Thankfully, the British Free Corps had no more than 27 members at one time. And while this number is small, it's terrifying to think of what could have happened had the movement taken off properly. By the time the British Free Corps had mobilized and were ready to see combat, the war was pretty much over, and in 1945, the British Free Corps was officially disbanded. After word spread about the British Free Corps, the British Army and other agencies rounded the men up and interrogated them thoroughly to gauge their involvement and motivations. Many of the soldiers who were rounded up by the British forces proclaimed that they had joined the organization to become a double agent and sabotage the organization from the inside. This excuse worked for a few people. However, for John Amory, no amount of pleading or persuasion could change his superiors' minds. For his involvement, he was found guilty of high treason and sentenced to capital punishment that was carried out swiftly. Number 1. One of the scariest, little-known stories to come out of World War II is that of the Japanese fire balloons. World War II was a highly experimental time for armies around the world, as they tested new weapons and techniques to give them an advantage during battle. During 1944 and 1945, the Japanese army launched what they called the Fusen Bakudan, which literally translates to fire balloon. These balloons measured 10 meters in diameter and inflated to hold 19,000 cubic feet of hydrogen. These balloons were then fitted with incendiary devices that would activate upon landing after being carried by the strong winds, causing maximum destruction. The main target of these balloons was the US, and upon seeing them in the skies, the US Army and Air Force scrambled to shoot them down and disarm them before they could reach the ground. Over 9,000 Fusen Bakudans were released by the Japanese Army, and thankfully most of them landed in desolate and uninhabited areas in the US. When a balloon did land, they were found to be extremely ineffective and only claimed the lives of 6 people. These weapons were a huge failure for the Japanese army, who were left embarrassed and disappointed at their shortcomings. It's a good job that these weapons failed. Had they been successful, the number of casualties might have been in the thousands. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.